Hey gang, and welcome back. This is actually not a reminder, but rather an announcement. Flipside Gaming is now selling some exclusive Richard Kane Ferguson playmats, which you'll see in this video. There's Dakin Blackblade, Solkanar the Swamp King, Pillage, and Nebuchadnezzar. They're free shipping within the US, and you can use the promo code to help get 10% off. This week's game takes place at l'Abyss in Montreal. Unfortunately, I had to come back to New Jersey a little bit early, so I was only able to film 2 games there. This game has me playing Animar, and I keep a hand with 2 islands, Breeding Pool, Reflecting Pool, Den Protector, Raven Familiar, and Shivan Reef. Cedric has borrowed my Daretti deck, and keeps a hand with Goblin Welder, Grim Monolith, Scarecrow, Contagion Engine, and 3 Mountains. Rocky, who's been a long-time viewer and new to the channel, is playing Azusa, and keeps Liege of the Tangle, Dungrove Elder, 3/4, and Rogue's Passage. Scott is playing his Grimgrin deck, and keeps a hand with Dread Summoning, Phyrexian Arena, Fellwar Stone, Ghost Quarter, Cabal Coffers, and Polluted Delta. Cedric wins the die roll and starts us off. Cedric plays a mountain and casts Goblin Welder. Rocky plays a forest and passes. Scott plays a Polluted Delta and passes. I play a tapped Breeding Pool, and Scott cracks his fetch at the end of my turn, taking 1. Cedric plays a mountain and drops Grim Monolith. He then hits me for 1 with his Welder. Rocky plays a forest and passes. Scott drops a Ghost Quarter and casts Fellwar Stone. I play a Shivan Reef, and I pass my turn. Cedric plays a mountain and casts Daretti. He then upticks Daretti, discarding 2 and drawing 2. He passes to Rocky. Rocky plays a Rogue's Passage and casts Azusa. He then drops a forest and Mosswort Bridge, hiding away a card from the top 4 of his library, a bold move with Ghost Quarter on the field. Rocky then casts a Scute Mob and passes. Scott plays a Command Tower and casts a Mind Stone. He then casts Phyrexian Arena and passes turn. I play a Reflecting Pool as my land for turn, and pass. At the end of my turn though, Cedric taps the Goblin Welder to swap the Grim Monolith for Contagion Engine and targets Rocky. This puts a -1/-1 counter on all of Rocky's creatures and kills the Scute Mob. Cedric then drops a Phyrexian Core for his land for turn, and upticks Daretti once more, dumping 2 artifacts, one of which is a Scarecrow. He then casts an Unwinding Clock and passes to Rocky. Rocky drops a forest and casts Dungrove Elder, which is a 4/4 at this point, before passing to Scott. Scott loses 1 on his upkeep and draws a card, then draws for turn. He plays a Halimar Depths, rearranging the top 3, and then taps out to bring out Grimgrin, who should be tapped, Scott. I play an island and pay 3 to cast Raven Familiar, which unfortunately due to the glare looks like a pure white card. I keep 1 card and put the rest on the bottom. Cedric plays a Buried Ruin and pays 5 to cast a Gilded Lotus. He upticks Daretti once more, nearing ever closer to that brutal emblem, and ditches 2 lands. On Rocky's untap, in response to his Unwinding Clock trigger, Cedric taps his Gilded Lotus to float 3. He then untaps the Lotus and taps it once more before removing phases to activate the engine, proliferating twice, giving Daretti 2 loyalty counters and killing Azusa. Rocky then plays a forest in his main phase and activates Rogue's Passage, giving the Dungrove Elder unblockable. He moves to combat, smashing it into Daretti for 5. Scott loses 1 from the Arena trigger and draws an extra card before drawing for turn. He plays an Unholy Grotto as his land for turn, and Cedric remembers to untap its artifacts. Scott then casts Dread Summoning where X is 5, and we all mill 5 cards. We collectively mill 6 creatures, and Scott gains 6 tap zombies. He sacrifices 1 of them to untap Grimgrin and give him a +1/+1 counter. Moving to combat, Scott swings Grimgrin at Cedric, and puts the Grimgrin's on attack trigger on the Goblin Welder. Cedric taps the Gilded Lotus while the trigger is on the stack to float 3, and taps the Welder to bring back Burnished Heart. He then pays 3 to sacrifice it and get 2 lands while taking 6 from Grimgrin. With nothing else, Scott passes to me. On my upkeep, I don't pay the Echo cost, and the glared out Raven dies. I then cast a Lotus Cobra and play a Steam Vents, taking 2 so it comes into play untapped. I float a green with the Cobra trigger and cast Animar before passing to Cedric. Cedric counts up the board and casts Blasphemous Act for only 1 red. I ask around the table to see if anyone will respond, and apparently the only one with mana to do something is me, so I cast Swan Song to stop it. With his board wipe stopped, Cedric then plays Sequestered Stash and casts Trading Post. He then downticks Daretti, swapping the Unwinding Clock for a Kuldotha Forgemaster. Rocky plays another forest, and uses the Rogue's Passage to give Dungrove unblockable once more, attacking and killing Daretti in his combat step. Scott loses 1 and draws an extra card from the Arena trigger on his upkeep, and draws for turn. In his main phase, he plays Crypt of Agadim as his land for turn. He then pays 6 to cast Grave Titan, gaining 2 more zombie tokens, and sacrifices one of them to untap Grimgrin. Moving to combat, he swings Grimgrin at Rocky and the 5 zombies at me. Scott unfortunately only remembers after the fact that the Elder is hexproof, so he only gets in for 8 points of commander damage, while I block one of the zombies and take 8. I play an island for my turn and float a blue. I then pay 3 to cast a morph creature. I'm not saying it's Willbender, but it's probably a Willbender. Animar gains a +1/+1 counter, and I then cast Earthcraft after Rocky kindly hands me the morph token card. At the end of my turn, Cedric loses 1 life to make a goat token with his trading post. In his main phase, Cedric recasts Daretti and casts a Mirror Retriever. He then downticks Daretti, sacrificing the Retriever to return Burnished Heart to the field and an Unwinding Clock to his hand. Rocky draws for turn and taps out to cast Lifeblood Hydra, where X is 5. With nothing else, he passes to Scott. Scott loses another life from the arena, drawing an extra card. He plays an Underground River in his main phase and moves to cast Grave Pact. I respond by casting Venser, tapping some of my creatures to help untap the basics needed to pay for the cost, and I give Animar another +1/+1 counter. Scott unfortunately doesn't have enough black to recast it, and has to settle for a Talisman of Dominance instead. Scott then takes 1 from the Talisman to cast Fleshbag Marauder, and we all sacrifice a creature, with Rocky happily letting his Hydra die. Rocky gains 5 life and draws 5 cards. Scott then sacrifices another zombie token to untap Grimgrin, and swings everything at Cedric. He puts 2 zombie tokens onto the field from the Grave Titan trigger, and targets the Forge Master with Grimgrin's trigger. With the trigger on the stack, Cedric sacrifices the Forge Master, the engine, and the trading post to tutor for a Blightsteel Colossus and dumps it onto the field. He then blocks Grimgrin with the Colossus and takes 16. At the end of Scott's turn, I scream it's morphing time, but not really, and megamorph my Den Protector to return Reclamation Sage to my hand. During my main phase, I pay 2 to cast Oracle of Moldiah, giving Animar another +1/+1 counter and revealing a Wooded Foothills, which I play off the top. I'm in a bit of a pickle as I want a basic from the fetch, but I don't want to lose survival, so I compromise and instead cast Reclamation Sage to blow up Cedric's Burnished Heart, giving Animar another counter. I am then able to tap all of my creatures to untap my island and pay to cast Kozilek, Butcher of Truth. I draw 4 cards and reveal Imperial Recruiter off the top. I then cast Cloud of Fairies, untapping 2 lands and giving Animar another counter. Before passing to Cedric though, I drop 1 more creature, Shaman of Forgotten Ways, and pass. Cedric draws for turn and upticks Daretti, pitching 2 to draw 2. He recasts the Unwinding Clock before dropping a Thought Vessel. Moving to combat, he swings the Colossus at me for some strange reason, and I block it with my Kozilek, who gets 11 -1/-1 counters. Moving to Rocky's turn, Cedric untaps his Colossus, which is pretty good. Rocky, with a grip full of new cards, casts Avenger of Zendikar and gains 8 plant tokens. He plays a Forest, and suddenly those little 0/1 plants are now worth at least 8 points of damage. Rocky then pays 1 to activate his Mosswar Bridge, and reveals Colony Hydra. With nothing else, he passes to Scott. Scott loses 1 and draws an extra card from his Arena trigger, and plays a Swamp in his main phase. He then casts a Grave Pact, but I respond while it's on the stack. I take 1 from the Wooded Foothills to find a tropical island, and cast Court of Calling. I do so by tapping some of my creatures for Earthcraft to pay for the cost, and I find a creature. I grab Eternal Witness and return Swansong, tapping the Witness to pay for Swansong's cost. Moving to combat, Scott swings 3 tokens at Daretti, and the rest at Cedric. This gives him 2 more tokens from the Grave Titan trigger, and Cedric blocks the Grave Titan with his Colossus, and 1 of the tokens with a bird, taking 6 and letting Daretti die. Scott then casts Shouldered and passes to me. On my upkeep, I sacrifice my Kozilek to the Shoulder trigger, shuffling it and my graveyard into my library. I then reveal the top card, a Misty Rainforest, and draw it for turn, revealing Hardened Scales. I play the Misty for my land for turn, cracking it and taking 1 to grab a Forest. I pay 2 to cast Survival, and discard an Ancient Statue to go and find Timur Sabertooth. I cast it and bounce Cloud of Fairies and recast the fairies several times to make Animar huge. I then discard the fairies to go and grab Perforos, casting it as well. I then bounce Den Protector back to my hand, casting it for free, and flipping it to return the statue. With the statue in my hand, I'm able to cast it and bounce it back to my hand over and over, which kills the table with Perforos' triggers. Game review time. So, cue the comments about how losing to combo is awful. I'll take them, I accept them, but let's face it, everyone was tapped out, I had an opportunity, and I went for it. And, as a result, I won because of the combo. For the most part, people seemed to leave me alone. There were several combat steps where Scott sent everything at Cedric, which probably might not have been his best idea. It became very clear midway through the game that I wasn't going to be able to win through overrunning people with creatures, and I'd have to go for a combo win, as everyone either had a good board state or really good creatures to block with. What enabled me to get there in the end though was survival of the fittest. If I hadn't found that, I'm pretty much guaranteeing that I would have been overrun by zombies, or the Blightsteel Colossus, or some kind of mixture of plant tokens. Goblin Welder was fantastic, and I think Cedric used the unwinding Goblin Welder on turn 1 is fantastic, especially when you can follow it up with a Grim Monolith and then basically cheat out Daretti and start filling your graveyard with things to swap back and forth from the battlefield to the graveyard. I would say until the last turn, Scott's Grimgrin deck was probably threat number 1. He seemed to have an abundance of tokens which allowed him to keep untapping Grimgrin, and blowing up a key creature on every attack step was really working in his favor. Animar's protection from black and white would have helped me, but I think if I'd allowed the Grave Pact to resolve, this game would have gone in Scott's favor very quickly. It's a shame Azusa only came out once, but Rocky didn't really have a ton of card draw, so it wasn't as though his hand was full of lands to dump anyway. There was also the tribal sub-theme element for Hydras, and I'm always a fan of seeing tribal decks. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MTGMudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/MTGMudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.